Welcome to Behind the Masterpiece. I am your host, Brian Hirsch, happen to be the CEO for the Arts and Cultural Alliance of Sarasota County. You can check out this podcast by going to visitsarasota.com. And with us today from the Sarasota Opera performances, we have tenor Rafael Davila. Rafael, welcome to Behind the Masterpiece.
Hi, my pleasure. Thank you. How are you?
I'm great. I hope you're doing well. I'm sure as an opera performer, it's incredibly intoxicating, incredibly, adventurous, but so much. Now, listen, for all of our listeners new, Sarasota Opera, an amazing place. They can catch you right now in Cavalleria Rusticana and Pagliacci now through March 29th. They can go to sarasotaopera.org. But not only do you perform at Sarasota Opera, you've performed all over the world, from the Metropolitan Opera, amazing. I worked at Lincoln Center a long time ago, seen plenty of operas at the Met, fantastic, to performing all over the world. And here you are in two operas, two betrayed husbands, two tragic ends in the Sarasota Opera. So we'll get into those in just a moment. Sure. But first, let's start with this. Rafael, not all of us are opera singers. What drew you to wanting to perform to opera at the beginning? How did you get into this?
Oh my God, I call myself a late bloomer in opera because I studied science. I have a degree in science and I was doing my doctorate degree in optometry. When they called me to sing in the opera chorus because of my experience with choir, but I didn't know anything about opera. And when they heard me singing in the opera chorus, I said, you have a talent. You could make a living singing. And, I always loved music. Music was a very important part of my life since I was a child. My father was a saxophone player at a salsa band back home in Puerto Rico. So, at 7 years old, I started studying piano. At 9, I started playing the guitar. And at 14, I started singing in choirs. So I always loved music. I wanted to dedicate my life to music, but I didn't know if I had the talent. So 3 years away from getting my doctorate degree in optometry, I decided to go into the conservatory and start all over again. So 27 years old, I really started to study music formally. And my teacher told me because my voice had already matured and it would be faster. So it was, my third year at the conservatory, I won the Met auditions back home. And then I got a scholarship to study my master's degree in opera performance at the University of Texas in Austin. And right after there, I started working with a local company, Austin Lyric Opera. And it's been 30 years and, singing nonstop since then. So, I didn't know anything about opera when I started to study at the conservatory because of my choir background. I thought, well, maybe I'll be a choir director or I will sing in a professional choir. But then my teacher, introduced me into the opera world and it fit, my voice as a tenor. And of course, I'm happy and I'm really lucky to still, after more than 30 years performing, I'm still here singing major roles in important houses.
Amazing. Kudos. What a cool story. I think opera is unique that I hear some of these things that, you do need to be mature. And that voice, so many opera singers struggle at an early age because their voices have not matured. So in some ways you were able to leverage your experience in life and just maturity that it worked out. That is not always the easy path.
I think you also need that physical mature, but also mental mature to be mentally mature. I taught at the University in Puerto Rico. I taught at the conservatory, and I teach private lessons every once in a while and give master classes. And this generation, they are used to everything to be fast, and they want everything to be quick. And it's like in the past, opera singers started late, and that secures them a long life. Sometimes I tell them, if you do this too fast, that fast, you're going to stop singing. Because, it's like an athlete. You develop all these muscles and, all this technique until then you're able to perform major roles.
I love it. Let's talk about that because I know enough that I've seen operas and it is like you're talking about the endurance an opera artist has to have. And can you tell us, what is the training like? Because with opera, there are so many, and it's so unique vocally, right? Choral singing is completely different because the opera voice is meant to punch through over an orchestra, over a hall, no amplification. You know, when this was started hundreds of years ago, there were no microphones. It's not like a pop concert that you go to. So what is that training like, and how do you prepare for all of these different repertoire and roles?
Yeah, well, I think also that in the past, these theaters were built with acoustics to help you produce your sound, and project your sound. So sometimes I have to sing live, outside, so we need to have some amplification. But I think it's like an athlete. We developed this with years of training. I went through all the repertory. I started with the bel canto. I sang almost all the tenor roles in the Mozart operas. And then I started working with Verdi. I've done most of the Verdi operas and Puccini and, all the verismo, which is I'm doing here. And especially now in Sarasota, I'm singing 2 operas in one night. They're short operas, but it's a lot of singing. Not many tenors in history have done it. But I think I did it here for the first time 20 years ago. I did these 2 operas for the first time here 22 years ago.
Way.
So I'm celebrating my 20th anniversary with Sarasota Opera with these roles. I've been singing with them for 22 years now. And I've been able to perform this after, in Puerto Rico, back home. In Italy, I did both operas in Teatro San Carlo in Naples, as well as in Macerata Festival. And just recently, I sang only Cavalleria Rusticana for Pittsburgh Opera. So I'm happy to come back to this repertory. And, at my age, after my experience, how my voice has developed and grown, these are the perfect opera for me. It's a long night, but it's well written, and then I have a good break between the scenes to recover. I did one of the biggest roles for tenor in the repertory, in the Italian repertory, is Otello. So I did my first Otello here in Sarasota. And people tell me, how can you make it? It's like, well, it's well written, and if you have the right voice for the repertory, you don't have to worry. But, as I told you, I went through all this other repertory that I think helps you to grow as a singer, as a performer. I did all the Mozart repertory, which is very hard. It's a very lyric repertory for young voices, but it sits in what we call the passaggio, which is that passage that we have from our chest voice to our head voice. So, because I did all of this repertory, I think helped me to master that range, and then, you apply that to whatever repertory you do. But I think we are like athletes, and we are like a marathon runners, and we start developing it little by little, and we tried little repertory. And I'm glad that Sarasota Opera gave me the opportunity 20 years ago, when I was still young, I was a young tenor, to experience this repertory and, to let my voice grow into this. And I remember I was working with my teacher already then, the teacher that I have a coach in New York that I go to, and he came to see the performance, and he was the one who told me, well, Rafi, I think this is your repertory. This is what you should be singing for the rest of your life. And I'm glad, because, at this stage in my life, if I was singing the lyric repertory, I would have to leave that to the young singers. But I think for this repertory, it's the right time, is the right moment for me, and it's the right voice. So it's something that not many young singers should try too early, because they could damage their voices.
Rafael, you taught a lot about sort of the different styles and vocally and the repertoire, but let's talk about one other thing in the repertoire, and then let's move on to the roles you're playing here. These are not only their different styles that you've alluded to, just musically and artistically, but opera singers have a command of languages as well.
Yes.
And so to be an authentic artist, we need to have that understanding of the role that we're playing and the language. How do you make this part of your process of knowing these different languages and being fluent in these languages to deliver a convincing performance?
Sure. I mean, we have to learn how to pronounce every language. I remember I studied my undergraduate at the Conservatory in Puerto Rico. So we took 1 year of French, 1 year of Italian, and 1 year of German. So it was not only the pronunciation, but also grammatically. to know how to speak. So I was able to speak Italian when I went to Italy, for example. Then when I came to do my master's degree in Austin, I took a diction class. And then that's where I learned the IPA. And it's funny because right now, my first language is Spanish, which I speak with my friends, with my wife, with my family. I'm working in the United States, so I talk every day in English. I speak in English. I'm singing these 2 Italian operas while I'm also rehearsing for my upcoming engagement, which is with Florida Grand Opera in Miami, which is Carmen in French. So we're going through 4 different languages at the same time each day. But that's something that you learn little by little. I sang this 20 years ago, as I said. So you learn it. We have special coaches that help us with the diction as well as with the technique. So we have to review all of those with all our roles with these coaches. And what can I say? I remember it's very funny because sometimes I do Carmen with dialogues and sometimes with recits. So sometimes I have to sing the whole opera, or sometimes I have to speak some recit and sing. And I remember I did a Carmen a few years ago here in Florida, and a French-speaking person came afterwards and started talking to me in French. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't speak French, but your French is perfect. It's like, well, yeah, that's what we train for. Italian, I can deal a little bit more because I've been in Italy many times. It's very close to Spanish, and most of the repertoire I do is in Italian. So my Italian is much better than the French. Still, I can read it, I can understand, but we need to make sure that if there's someone who speaks the language in the audience, they can understand and it's as close as possible to the original language. For me, it's kind of a problem because Spanish is very close to Italian, so I need to make sure to see my Italian not like a Spanish speaker, but like an Italian speaker. And Turidu is very, very, very interesting because it's in Sicily. So this opera takes place in Sicily. So at the beginning of the opera, during the overture, backstage, behind the curtains, I sing a serenade in Sicilian. So I had to learn how to pronounce all the words, not only in Italian, but also in Sicilian, which is also a little bit closer to Spanish because of the kingdom, the 2 Sicilian kingdoms from when Spain was in charge of that region of Italy and the Mediterranean. That it keeps us busy and entertained all the time.
I love it. What you're describing is this is like a history of culture around the world and these influences. This is why I love music and art so much, is to tell us this time. And then there are these modern tools that help us. IPA, for those listening, is not a beer. It's not an India Pale Ale, but it is the International Phonetic Alphabet that helps people decode all of these languages. But as you hear Rafael speak, it's still important to bring each character's authenticity to these roles. So, Rafael,
but I think also the important thing, I'm sorry to interrupt, is that still music is the universal language. So people will come to the opera. So I don't understand the opera. That's why I don't come to the opera. Well, they have subtitles like they do in the movie theaters, but only by seeing what's happening on stage, feeling the music. You don't even have to understand the language. You know what is going on stage.
Here. Thank you for saying that, because I know people really want to be like, oh, I got to read. And so honestly, when I go, I'm like what you're describing. I'm like, I want to experience the feel. I'm going to capture it and convey it enough.
Yeah, you do.
Like as artists, you do an amazing job to tell us what the meaning is. And you're right. That's the beauty of art, and that's the beauty of this grand art form in opera. You don't have to know what you've all trained to do.
Correct.
You've worked hard for us to have be able to experience the meaning that you're talking about. So let's dig in and talk about all these things you prepared for. So Rafael, you've got 2 roles, 2 operas, 2 betrayed husbands, 2 tragic ends, all of this happening. So Turidu and Canio. So talk us through these roles. Talk us through Turidu. You started. You started with it begins in Sicily. Tell us what you're playing and how does this sort of unfold as much as you can.
Sure. I mean, operas many times are based on literary works, and whenever that's available, I try to read it. And Turidu, Cavalleria Rusticana is based on this play. So there's a story before the curtain comes up, and it's that Turiddu was in love with Lola, but he had to go serve as a soldier. When he came back, she was married to this other guy, and as revenge, he started dating another woman, and but still he has feelings for Lola. So that makes them to have an affair. So Lola is being unfaithful to her husband, and then the other girl, which is Santuzza, tells Lola's husband what's going on. So that's all the situation with this opera and the tragedy at the end of the opera. So I play Turiddu, and the love interest, as usually the tenor is. But it's beautiful music. I love these both operas. I love to perform, but I certainly love the music from Cavalleria Rusticana.
Beautiful, wonderful. So tell us a little bit about Canio and Pagliacci, which, even though there's a clown, it's not such a comedy
exactly.
in a way,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So can you walk us through? Yeah,
sure. They are actors, and they do what is called commedia dell'arte, which is a very old form in Europe. And each one has a character. And the Pagliaccio, and then Beppe is the young tenor, then he's the Harlequin, and then Nedda, who's the lover, then she is the love interest in the show. So I'm the leader of this company, a touring company of actors, performers that go from town to town. He's an older guy who takes this orphaned young girl and makes her part of the company, and also he marries her, and but she has an affair with a local person from this specific town, and he finds out right before I sing the very famous and iconic aria "Vesti laggiù, barridi, Pagliaccio" that everybody has heard before. And this aria talks about the pain of having, as a performer, to go and make people laugh while still in your heart you have this amazing pain, and you have to hold back from whatever you're feeling just to project this other character. And the funny thing is that then we put up this show that we came to this town to do, and it's the same situation, it's the same words. So he hears her saying to the Arlecchino in the show the same words that he heard her saying to her lover when he found them. So the Commedia dell'arte develops into something different from the libretto. And then, he just corners her, and he decides, to ask her for the name of her lover. And, it ends very tragically, as people will find out at the end of the opera. So it's very, very dramatic. And I really enjoy doing these operas. People, you're such a nice guy, Rafi, how do you make it? So, well, it gives me the opportunity to be something different that's from what I am. And the music also guides us to all these feelings and sensations. And I think the audience also feel it.
I love it. Rafael, tell us. So let's dig into that a little bit more. So as we were saying, these are two operas. These are not comedies. These are definitely a little bit more tragic. And they're sort of distinctive styles, tragedies, comedies, right? Those mask, archetypes are interesting. But not only are the operas dramatic, this is high drama, right? That these are both so tragic. Sure. How do you bring that? How do you prepare for that? And I think what your friends and peers are asking is how do you step into it? Because we hope most of our lives are not as dramatic as opera to an extent, but there's something really helpful to the human spirit to see this. How do you prepare for this drama, and what does this high drama tell us?
Wow. To be honest, I don't know. But this is the opera that they call verismo. It went with the verismo movement in literature. We call it realism in literature. So we talk about real characters, not about kings or gods. We're talking about, for the first time in theater and in opera, they're showing commoners, and the situation that goes between them, so people can relate to real life situations. And I remember I worked in Puerto Rico once with a theater director. He had never done an opera, but he directed us in opera. And he was amazed at how the opera singers, we had opera singers and we had also actors working in this piece together. I said, your melodrama, it's so amazing. I said, well, that's what opera is about. We have to go to the extreme, vocally, physically. And, that only shows, in the way we perform. It's very satisfying at the same time, is that people who know me, my wife goes to see this opera, which she has seen me perform many times. I say, Rafi, you made me cry. You get into the piece, but people really identify with the characters on stage. And because it's a live performance in a venue like the Sarasota Opera that is very intimate, very close, we are closer than you would be in any other theater. People really identify, and I think they really feel what we feel on stage. So to do this, I guess, I went, as I told you, through maybe 15 different operas of Verdi, all the operas of Mozart. So I think the voice and the singer develops chronologically, just like the operas were composed. So that's why we start with Italian songs. Then we do some bel canto from the 17th century, and then we do 18th century Mozart, and then we go to the romanticism of Verdi or even Beethoven. And we finish, with the realism of the late 19th century and early 20th century verismo operas. So,
I love it. Not only today are you telling us about you and the roles and everything in the Sarasota Opera, we've done a nice opera history lesson today, taking us around the world and all the styles. So we're grateful for you,
I would like
Rafael.
to talk about that, especially when I teach, because people need to understand how the process is, and I think we have to go parallel to know how the music was developed to be able to perform in the different styles.
Absolutely. Thanks for enlightening us today. I think for our listeners to really see how in depth it is to not only perform in the opera, but what we can experience, the range, the style, the emotion. It's so much, I think, as you've compared things to athletes, I think people in today's world can relate to that of going, hey, what is sort of the physical nature of preparing? Sure. So with that, let me get you out of here on this. Again, Rafael Davila, performing at the Sarasota Opera now through March 29th in Cavalleria Rusticana and Pagliacci. What sort of rituals do you have before you embody this, before you step into these roles, before we see you this week? What do you do in that lead up to going into this character and these characters in these roles?
Well, I'm very grateful that for Sarasota Opera to give us a good break between shows. Actually, we have 2 days of rest before opening night, and we are getting at least 2 days between performances. Right now, I'm in the middle of 5 days of rest to come back and do the rest of the shows. And I have to rest. And then my ritual is that the night before, I take advanced ginger, honey, lemon tea to help, with my vocal cords. In the morning, I try to rest as much as possible. And I have a good meal. The first time I did Cavalleria Rusticana and Pagliacci was here 20 years ago, as I said. And my teacher at the time told me, make sure, who was a tenor himself, he told me, you have to eat a good piece of meat and pasta because, it's a long night and you need protein and carbs that are inside your body and then you can burn, during the whole night. And so recently I've been taking a lot of coconut water, which is like the best thing to hydrate yourself. And I eat my banana in the intermission between the two shows. And, just try to rest, not drink the days I'm performing, because, we have to take care of our cords, the reflux, and it's a very sacrifice. You have to really, take care of yourself, take care of your instrument, which is within us. So to be able to perform and make this job that I think is really monumental, physically and vocally.
Yeah, amazing. Physically, mentally, monumental for us to experience. Mazel tov and congrats on coming back 20 years later to be in these roles again. Turidu and Canio in Cavalleria Rusticana and Pagliacci. Rafael Davila. Thank you so much for being on Behind the Masterpiece.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Amazing. All right, everyone. I'm your host, Brian Hirsch. I'm behind the masterpiece. You can always go to visitsarasota.com to catch that and get tickets to go see Rafael by going to sarasotaopera.org. Until next time, peace. Thanks for listening to this episode of Behind the Masterpiece, brought to you by Visit Sarasota County. For more and to hear this podcast, go to visitsarasota.com.